Is there a desire for expanding health access to food, health, and personal items? Do you have any thoughts or ideas toward how we can build more equity or inclusiveness in this area around making sure that people have regular access to those type of basic needs?
Yeah, I think, the concern when I came here, for me, there was a grocery store downtown. There was Brooks downtown. I mean, there was a meat market downtown. There was a clothing store and a shoe store. So I understand when people say to me, if I don't have a car, how do I access those things? Because AATA, which really provided in the last few years more buses more often for people to get places and more frequently, has been a great service. But we do have, I feel, that there's a shortage in terms of equity when it comes to food access. That if you don't have a car, you have to travel over the bridge to Kroger, or you have to go over the bridge on Michigan Avenue to Kroger. That's something I know people would want as an amenity. The challenge we have, however, with grocery stores is that those businesses really require a certain population and a certain income sometimes. So it's a matter of us looking at what's existing, which is our co-op food model, and maybe expanding that so people have access to greater food and choices in terms of health. But the other thing is we have great health care. We have several community-based health centers right downtown. One for teens, which is the corner. We also have the one at Hobbs Building. And Packard Health is in town now. So I think those opportunities are increasing, and all of those have ensured that there are on the bus line. So I think that people have greater access to health care, but it is the food shortage and food insecurity that is a priority right now. Yeah, I mean, I think that, when it comes to access, one of the things I talked about was actually building on the food co-op model, that expanding and helping them expand, because there has been conversations about them building out, and I think we need to help do that. I think the city needs to step in just as they have with the Freight House and with the pool and other things, and talk about how can we help them grow. Because there is, the issue around food security or food insecurity in our city, because people, if you don't have a car, how do you get to the grocery store? I mean, that means you have to take the bus or get a friend. And I mean, I've done it. I've lived in Ypsi for 40 years. So I mean, I come from an area in Ypsilanti where the buses stopped at 6 o'clock and it only ran on Washtenaw. So if you got to the grocery store, that meant you had to find a friend or a relative or someone who could run you to Myers and then wait for you and then bring you back home. So I mean, I understand that. I think now, though, we need to talk about what is best for the citizens and what the citizens want to see happen. And for me, that's the food co-op. So that means that it's accessible. It has great opportunity in terms of what you can purchase there, food and other goods. So we need to talk about how we expand on that model, whether that's in square footage or whether we put one on the other side of Ypsilanti, how that happens. But that's a conversation we have with the citizens and with the food co-op to see if they have the capacity to do that.
So we actually have someone in the audience who may disagree with that. Why don't you share your thoughts?
Yes, I do disagree with that. I don't think food co-op is a viable option, and I wanted to actually focus more on what could be done about the liquor stores and party stores that are all over Ward 1 in particular, that have all kinds of health violations and questionable conditions for people to even buy food from.
Your question is, first you said that you don't agree with the food co-op model.
Not as the solution for the city, specifically because their location is in Ward 3. So there are a lot of people who are on the other side of town who have problems with getting to the food co-op. So unless that expansion meant that they would relocate to another part of town, I don't really know how that could affect people in the other wards.
Yeah, that's what we talked about, that we talked with them to see if that model could be duplicated in another side of town. There used to be, if you're familiar with Harriet Street, there's, I think Hope Clinic owns it now, but there used to be a store there that they have. But when it comes to the liquor stores in Ward 1, or you're talking about throughout the city? Yeah, and when I came here, there was just Bud and Joe's, which is still there on the corner of Harriet and the Yellow Party Store. There's application now for a liquor, for the gas station there across the street to actually get a liquor license. I think it's a concern. I think that City Council heard from citizens last week, and I think they're going to hear again at the Planning Commission. I know some of the local pastors are planning on coming to that commission meeting on the 19th to talk about that, because one, they're going to talk about the expansion of the medical marijuana facility, but they're also going to talk about giving this gas station another liquor license. At this point, I have to say this. When people apply for a liquor license, they apply to the state, but they have to get approved from City Council. So if at any point in time the citizens feel like, you know, there are too many, that we shouldn't give access, that's where your voice comes in. That's where, when we talk about creating space at the table, that you come to city council and make that known, because sometimes it boils down to, and it's just my opinion, it may boil down to relationships in terms of the gas station owner or whomever coming and saying, you know, we want to expand our business. So city council is weighing two things. One, they're weighing the expansion of a business, which we talked about, hires additional people. But the other thing is the community concern, which should outweigh that. When we talk about people over profits, that's when that comes into play, is that you have to consider how that impacts that community and people in that neighborhood. And I don't think a lot of times we take that into consideration because we're so gung-ho to make sure that the businesses stay and that they stay viable. And a lot of times businesses say, well, the way for me to stay viable is for me to now sell liquor and, you know, to sell alcoholic beverages. And for me, that's a conversation with the business owner that says, what are you really in business to do? And how do you intend to serve our citizens in the best way? And if you feel that alcohol is the way to go, then maybe you don't need to be doing business here in our city.
I think it's pretty clear that everybody's in business to make money. That's the ultimate goal of all business.
Well,
So-
I think our hope would be that people would be in business to serve people.
I mean, we would hope, but
Yeah.
ethically, there's always going to be gray area, especially when you're selling substances like alcohol that have been proven to lead to a lot of pain and suffering on behalf of innocent people. So even though there's a debate going on over whether the marijuana dispensaries should exist, I find it still very troubling that there's not a lot of attention paid on behalf of city staff to the consequences of allowing the sale of alcohol in these massive quantities
Yeah.
in these communities,
And
in
you make a
spite of
good
there
point.
being no grocery stores or places to get fresh fruit.
Yeah, and you make a good point. I think that one of the concerns I had on council was the fact that and this isn't anything in comparison to selling liquor or alcohol, but it was the road diet on Hamilton that the city staff was proposing, because that's the new wave in terms of when we talk about multimodal, that there's a bike lane, that but I mean, you also have to take into consideration the city and the city people. And when the city staff came and said, well, we want to do a road diet on Hamilton, my concern was, have you talked to Second Baptist Church? Have you talked to the neighbors, the citizens, and how it's going to impact them? And the answer was, well, yeah, you know, we sent out a notice. And for me, that's not good enough. When I talked to the pastor of Second Baptist, his concern was, we park on Hamilton Street on Sunday morning, and we've done that for 100 years. The second thing was, he said Hamilton Street is very busy. It's oftentimes backed up, that there's traffic that's at a stop because of the light. And when I talked to the city staff, that was not a consideration. The pastor had to actually come to the council meeting and share his thoughts. And my thinking, which I said to staff at that time, is we have to be more open and we have to be more honest. That it's not just about us, because at the end of the day, at 5 o'clock, you know, when you turn off the lights to your office and go on home, people still live in that neighborhood, still live in that community to deal with the results of what you're proposing. And so for me, in terms of dealing with city staff, they have to be more in the community. One of the things is that when you propose things like that, it's not just a proposal because it looks good on paper or it looks good to Lansing or it looks good for a funder. It has to look good for the people that deal with that 24/7. So that means that you walk down that street literally and knock on those doors and talk to people about the fact that we want to propose a road diet. What do you think about that? But then you have to educate people and say, why are you proposing a road diet? And then let the citizens tell you, well, I don't think it's a good idea. Now, we have managed to hold off on Hamilton to this point because of that pushback, and that's what has to happen in the case of this liquor store application. There are some citizens who've already said to me that they plan on coming to council to advocate for it, because why would you hold a business back? But to your point, we have to have just as many people there or more that say, these are the results of alcohol and other substances in our community. And believe me, I lived in Ipsy long enough to know that I lived through the crack crisis, which was rampant on Harriet, that you couldn't even drive down. When people talk about driving in this city and being safe, when you drove down Hamilton and Harriet right at that corner, sometimes you couldn't even get through the intersection. It was just that busy. And it took a lot of citizens, it took a lot of hard work, it took commitment and dedication to really clear up that and clean up that corner where there's businesses there now, barbershops and others, but you have to be very vocal. And I think that you have to also stand your ground, because it's a matter of you saying we don't want it and we're not gonna have it. And that we're asking city staff to go back and propose something different. Now, the other thing is to go to that gas station. And citizens need to approach the gas station owner and say, listen, we already have a liquor store on this corner. We already have one 2 blocks down. We don't feel that it's necessary for you to have one on this corner. Has anybody in the neighborhood done that yet?
No, because like you said, businesses are prioritized even by city staff. So I think that there's overall an atmosphere of, I wouldn't say apathy, but maybe ignorance as to what processes there are that allow for that kind of communication to be facilitated. Because I wouldn't even know if I wanted to address a concern about health violations at a party store, what the use would be of going to the actual people who work there and voicing my concerns. It seems a little counterproductive.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's counterproductive. I mean, I think that's where you start. Because if people don't know, they don't know. And people will continue to sell you what you buy. If if people exercise their dollars there or spend their dollars there. And the same spot I'm talking about, which is owned by Hope Clinic right now, people did shut that place down because they were selling poor quality fruit. So that has happened in the past because people got sick and tired. And I think that when you talk about city staff having prioritizing businesses, again, that's a conversation in terms of you have to weigh those things out. And for me, always, it's the citizens, because the citizens are the ones that we're working on behalf of. So their voice is the most important. And that means that we have to go, and I've said this before, investing in people means, first of all, we invest in our staff. Because our staff needs to understand the priorities of council, and that is that we're there to represent and serve people. And in return for their contribution in that, they too are to represent and serve the people. So that means that has to be translated throughout the organization so that people, one, understand that they're valued, but at the same time that they value our citizens in the sense that our citizens come first. And you hear that all the time, people come first, or people are first. But that has to not just be words, it has to be an action. So that means, for me, if there's a liquor store, we can't have a liquor store on every corner. That means, though, through your planning department, your master plan doesn't call for that. And that's where it starts, that if when issues pop up, you go to your master plan, which is the guiding document, and says to you, we cannot have another liquor store in that community.
Okay, we have another question from.
But let me, real
I'm
quick,
sorry, go ahead.
did that address your concern in some way?
Yeah.
Okay. And the thing with the grocery store is that is just one model that we're talking about. I think, again, which I said earlier, the city of Ypsilanti had a grocery store when I came here. But the difference now is that, one, the income level has shifted, that we don't have and DeMoss is still there, the grocery store. Is there now, took over Brooks. But the other thing is, grocery stores come in when they know they have a certain income and a certain population. So, I mean, we have to search far and wide if we want a commercial grocery store to come in, and I'd be in favor of that. I just think that it takes work, and it takes work of people looking and having those kind of conversations, those meetings, to attract those kind of grocery stores. And that's why I think for us, expanding that food co-op model at this point would be It would be doable in the sense that we may be able to put in a second one, on the other side of town so people would have access, or one downtown. But for now, in terms of space and location and opportunity, that would probably be the easiest to do for us. But if that's something that the citizens would say, well, we're really not interested, then, we don't go down that page. But you have to give people opportunity, and you have to give them examples of what's existing that you can expand upon, and then go from there. But that's where the conversation starts. So I appreciate you saying that you don't think that's a good thing, that people don't have access to that. And it is difficult. Again, if you don't have transportation, that means you have to catch a couple buses to get there. And believe me, I do it pretty much on a daily basis. I know what it takes to get from place to place, because sometimes you have to take 2 buses, and sometimes you have to wait. And I've done it, which I said to them, standing at the bus stop with 2 or 3 bags of groceries when I was single here in Ypsilanti, because we had to be hauled to Myers or wherever you could get to, can be a challenge, especially if you're dealing with children or a disability or time constraints. You have to build all that in to trying to catch the bus.
I would say that there are very well-off families in Ann Arbor that don't have to worry about that. And the reason that they don't have to worry about that is due to the effects of a system that has denied resources to areas like Ward One and the South Side through programs like Urban Renewal that have destroyed the business district down there that was flourishing and did have local grocery stores. So I think that that needs to be addressed directly if we're ever gonna have any lasting change.
Well, I think to some degree, when I came here, and again, I don't want to keep going back to the past, but Ypsilanti really was the seat of the county because we had all of the automotive industries. We had General Motors, we had Ford, so we were very flush when it came to resources. If you know that certain bills need to get paid, then why am I out spending money for something else that the family decided we weren't going to spend money on? So it starts with having that conversation around what is important to the citizens, and some of them have indicated that's infrastructure. So that means you sit down at city council table and say, the citizens have indicated to us that infrastructure priority, how do we make that happen? How is it feasible based on the dollars we have coming in? If a grocery store is important, city council has to sit down and say, how do we attract a grocery store to the city of Ypsilanti? So for me, it's just not about continuing to have those conversations and people for decades saying we need a grocery store. For me, it's about we need to take action on that. If that's the priority because people feel they don't have access, then we need to work on that first. You push all that other stuff to the side and say, listen, our citizens are saying they need a grocery store, because if you have a car, it's easy to get to. But if you don't have a car, and if the majority of our citizens don't have a car, then we put that at the top of the list. But you have to have leadership enough that's willing to take that hard stand. And that means that you have to have maybe sometimes midnight council meetings, not on foolishness, but on the conversation around how do we make that happen. And to have our citizens at the table to say, we don't want you to do anything else until you help get us access.